Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Cipher Brief Virtual Studio. I'm Tom Nagorski for a conversation today about China's drone industry and its military drones in particular, and how AI is accelerating China's advances in this area. There's a lot to talk about, and we're going to talk about it with Dr. Michael Raska. He is assistant professor of the Military Transformations Program at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. I think that's a title that fits perfectly, right? The Military Transformations Program. Dr. Raska joins us from Singapore today. It's great to have you with us. And I wonder if we could start, Dr. Raska, with something. You gave a talk recently in which one of your headlines was what you described as an AI wave in the Chinese military. Tell us, if you could, what you meant by that and what the manifestations of it are.
First of all, Tom, thanks for having me. Thanks everyone for joining this program. I really appreciate the opportunity. Now, to think about, the military transformations in a Chinese context and the AI wave is not only the AI wave in China. We're thinking about AI wave in Europe, in the US, and other militaries. And basically what I mean by that is for the past 40 years, we have talked about emerging technologies in a different context and different conflicts. And in the context of these emerging technologies, we talked about IT-driven revolutions of military affairs, right? And so we have a different phases of IT RMAs in this, 80s, 90s, 2000, 2010s. And this IT RMA was basically US-led or Western-led, and it was about basically augmenting existing concepts, structures, and technologies with digitization and information technologies. Now, what I argue, the AI wave is fundamentally very different from the past IT digitization waves, where AI not only augments, but increasingly replaces humans, replaces the traditional military structures, defense ecosystems, and it provides a real serious, extraordinary defense transformations that it was, that is fundamentally different from the IT RMA waves in the past.
Yeah. And when you say replacing humans, of course, that takes us right to drone warfare, a huge subject of the moment. And for us, you also talked in this address or this lecture you gave about the dronification of the Chinese military. What should we understand? I mean, we know there's a big buildup, but just how dronified is China's military becoming?
Well, to think about, from the Chinese perspective, in a way, they pursue a dual-track military modernization. So on one hand, you have the legacy systems, you have the replacements of the third and fourth generation. Think about replacing the old tanks, fighter jets, ships and missiles that they have been developing for ages, and which have been really not that spectacular, and which have faced a lot of problems. But at the same time, the other track is really where they focus on what they call the new domains of military rivalry. And basically, that's a convergence of space, near space, cyberspace, and underwater. And those are these four new domains that they believe they can have strategic and operational advantage in going forward. So in each of the domains, particularly from near space, and air and land domain, underwater, they are developing unmanned systems and increasingly experimenting, right? And across a different, technological and conceptual and organizational areas. I mean, what is really interesting is that they have come, from this copier reproducer of technologies. Think about it, the 90s, 2000s, where they were copying, let's say American design drones, right? The Predator, the Reaper, right? They were being translated and copied in the Chinese PLA versions, but increasingly under the AI wave, where the AI-driven military modernization or even transformation enables to develop completely new systems that the West that hasn't had before. So we are talking about, near space or sort of supersonic drones. We are talking about these long-range reconnaissance drones that are in design very, very different, from what the West has. And at the same time, we are not talking about only these major drones, but also these mini micro drones, right? The cost-effective drones, which they have advantage. So think about the Chinese commercial market controls 70% of drone production and exports, right? And so I think they have advantage in the production, and the domestic industry is able to turn out, very fast these smaller drones. So they have a production, they have large inventory, and they have also the AI. So all these combined, they have been experiencing sort of a leap forward, a phase leap
Hmm.
forward in the quality and quantity of all the drones across the different domains, and in trying to experimenting with them and put them into practice.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned supersonic drones. We read recently about this huge aircraft. I guess it is also a drone, but one
Mhm.
that can carry lots of those micro
Yeah,
drones. What are the
yeah,
are there other products we should be aware of? They seem quite public, by the way. We
yeah,
see these things on Chinese media,
mhm,
Chinese television. What are some of
mhm.
the other things, as you say, that they're not copying, but they're building and creating themselves?
Well, I think everything that they came up with the last 5 years or so is fundamentally seems to be very, very different in a way, in the design, in conceptual philosophy, in a way how things are being used, and they're trying to basically experiment on the different areas. What is important to understand is all of these drones that they are showing, they are still in the experimentation phase. So they
Right.
are not in a, production. They are not really operationalized. So in other words, they are still untested, right? And
Hmm.
so they face a problem to integrate these drones across the domains, kind of like a similar problem that the US has with the multi-domain warfare or multi-domain operations, where you try to integrate the different domains and different technologies. So Chinese are also having similar issues, particularly even in a much bigger scale, because a lot of these, drones, again, they are experimental, and they are still, being developed. But that said, they are able to, if they keep the momentum going, right, and they have enough people and resources they are throwing in there. So I would argue that in the next decade or so, they will be able to operationalize and perhaps even test many of these systems that are being shown on an individual basis.
And then that takes to logically to the next question, which is maybe hard to answer at the moment, but how China's drone, and again, sticking with the military here, drone production, manufacturing, the overall industry stacks up against the United States.
Mhm. Well,
Well, go ahead.
That's a big question, and we have been studying, defense innovation trajectories in China and comparatively with other countries, including the U.S. And we have come through different phases in our estimation. I mean, what I mean, the analysts, most analysts in the West and the U.S. And there has been sort of I would say, different sort of waves on how we understand them. And if you think about 10, 15 years ago, there was a lot of underestimation, right? So the Chinese don't have the resources, they don't have the capacity, they still face a lot of bottlenecks. And of course, they have a lot of structural problems even to this day. But generally speaking, they are not able to close the gap, right?
Hmm.
Then I would say about, from when Xi Jinping came to power 2013, so about 2017 or so, where a lot of the new systems were coming on board, we started to really changing our estimates, and there has been sort of a lot of drive to overestimate the capabilities that the Chinese have, right? And a
Hmm.
lot of it comes also from the signaling, from the political signaling, from the Chinese leadership, from increasing confidence. So we went from the underestimation to overestimation of their capabilities, resources, right? And it has been and so in a way that created this polarized debate that on one hand you see a school of thought that argues that the China has a long way to go, and on the other hand you have those who argue that in some areas China is not only surpassed, but not only caught up, but also surpassed the West in specific areas, particularly, for example, in AI enabled unmanned technologies such as drones. And I would argue in that debate, I would argue the Chinese certainly have made the leap from being copier, reproducer, to being adapter and integrator, and now they are trying to become the critical innovator. right?
Yep. Yep.
But of course they face a lot of problems internal, think about corruption, think about the structural bottlenecks, think about the system, the communist system of the state-owned enterprises that, has a top-down innovation approach. There's no sort of bottom-up type. So everything is very much controlled, right? And that creates a lot of issues and problems. That's on one side, that's defense innovation. On the other hand, and I think what's really, we have to understand this, is the question of actually using it by the military. So all these new technologies are out there, but the militaries, all of them, including the US, including the PL, they all essentially struggle with implementing, integrating emerging technologies into scale and into at the operational level, right? And I
Yeah.
would argue this is a major problem for the PLA. I think about, not only integrating the services, the different legacy platforms, but also the new systems, but also basically, absorbing that innovation from the tech companies that they have in the civil military fusion and integrating them at the operational level. And
Yep.
that's where I think the US still has advantage because, of course, of a combat experience, continuous training, continuous bottom-up type of innovation, right? Where the military innovation, I think, still the US has that edge, right? But
Hmm.
bottom line, that margin of technological superiority that the US has enjoyed for the last 40, 50 years, that margin is shrinking gradually.
Yep.
And
Yep.
the Chinese are pouring more resources and manpower on the problem. They are very conscious about their weaknesses, and they are, trying to cut and surpass the US in major technological areas.
Yeah. Two quick questions in the time we have remaining, Dr. Raska. One is, we haven't mentioned Taiwan. To what extent do you believe this is driven by preparation for a potential war, or is it just a matter of keeping up with the United States and maybe passing them?
Well, I think it's both in a sense.
Mhm.
I think the PLA is driven by the leadership, right? So the political leadership drives, the expectations and requirements for the PLA, and of course everything is sort of aimed at regaining control over Taiwan. And not only Taiwan, think about, all the area of first and second island chain. So that means Korean Peninsula, East China Sea, Taiwan, South China Sea, Mekong River Delta, all the way, to the belt of China and India and Himalayas. So we are at the fault line of all these, flashpoint in a sense and the Chinese are increasingly being present militarily and having capabilities they never had before, right?
Right.
And increasingly testing them. And so for over Taiwan, there are different scenarios, but I think the PLA is also if I think about potential invasion of the Taiwan by the PLA in the next 2 or 3 decades, I would argue a lot of it will be driven by the unmanned systems.
Right.
So underwater, air, hypersonics, and there was a story just a couple of months ago where the PLA is experimenting with the blockade purely by unmanned systems,
That's
by
amazing.
using
Yeah.
different combination of drones, right, in order to control the area and negate the U.S. access in support of Taiwan.
And then last question, we talk so much about lessons from Ukraine. I have to imagine anybody who is in this space has to look at what happened last Sunday when Ukraine got all these
Mm,
drones to hit military bases in 5 different parts of Russia. What on earth is the lesson there? I guess that's more about counter drone defense,
mm.
right?
That's right. And China has been one of the, best students in terms of learning from other people's wars. So
Hmm.
Chinese acknowledge themselves they don't have any combat experience. So every decade or so, they have been meticulously studying lessons learned, right, from major conflicts. And that goes back all the way to the Persian Gulf War.
Hmm.
Think about 1998, the lessons learned from the bombing of Serbia, right, where the Chinese consulate was also bombed, right, where the Chinese really that mobilized that, the Xiaoshujian sort of the assassin's
Hmm.
maze program of emerging technology. So every decade they studied lessons learned from major wars in other countries or other geographical areas. And I would argue because of the closer relationship with Russia, right, and because of the Chinese observation of what happens in Ukraine, they are able to absorb a lot of the lessons much faster than ever before,
Right.
particularly in the use of drones and in both offensive and defensive areas, right? So again, using unmanned system creates opportunities, but also creates vulnerabilities that they
Yeah.
have to plug and play, and they have to defend themselves. So they focus also on for everything from developing electronic warfare countermeasures, kinetics, kinetic hard kill countermeasures, soft kill countermeasures. So the defensive component is as important or equally important as the offensive one, right? Again, but to what degree the PLA is able to absorb these lessons at the operational level at scale, right? That has yet to be seen.
Yeah. But as you say, they're good students. All right, Dr. Michael Raska, super appreciate your time. It's fascinating stuff. Dr. Michael Raska is at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies in Singapore. Thanks so much for being with us at the Cipher Brief.
Thank you for having me.